Good afternoon. I think in view of depletion in the total attendance, it will be better if we come forward. This session is being chaired by Dr. Tritibesh Mukherjee. Now, he needs no introduction. We know he is an internationally known and acclaimed steel personality and metallurgical sort of giant. He has been the Deputy Managing Director of Tata Steel. He has been on the technical committee of IISI, and currently he is on the board of Bharat Forge. I think I'll just see Rane, IFB, TAMP, etc. companies. His contribution is not recorded here, that he was associated on the process of this integration of Chorus and Tata Steel, and he will chair the session, and Bengal Chamber is very grateful to him for accepting the invitation. I'll just mention that when we selected the subject, we basically thought it was in our mind. It doesn't mean that it is obligatory for the chairman to go. He will go the way he thinks. This should be coordinated. In our mind, we had that when there is an acute depression, we know that various stakeholders of the steel industry have a little bit different approach. The shareholders, the employees, the raw material suppliers, the lenders, everybody wants that the good days should be back. Whereas quite often some buyers say, no, short term we are having good time, easy availability, easy import, easy payment terms, low prices, so it's a party time for us. But however, economists do say that in a country like India, if depression and other account, the prices don't improve and you don't have investment, there will be someday, in 5-7 years, again a cycle of 4-figure US dollar prices, and when your deficit will be so large that it will be worst time for the customers. So fair price is a mantra of growth of steel industry. So this will be an interactive session, but obviously independent speakers will highlight some of their own understandings and contributions in the field. Thank you.
Good afternoon. This is a users, producers interactive session, and in this group we have some users, Mr. Barton and Mr. Mukherjee, and there are some in between like Abraham Stefanos and some producers. So there is only 1 hour 15 minutes for us. I would request Partha Sengupta first to present his views. Partha Sengupta I tell because I don't have to read his biodata. He joined Tata Steel as a graduate trainee, metallurgical, had a brilliant career throughout. But when he was in charge of the customer services department, where steel is supplied to different customers, and he looked after, I think he made a name for himself. And subsequently he left Tata Steel to take up a new initiative, so to say, in Sri, looking after their raw materials. So Partha.
Am I audible? Yeah, that's correct. Yes, back. So, good afternoon to everybody. Firstly, thank you, because I am honored to see so many people post lunch. Actually, during the lunch we were discussing that how many chairs would really be filled up. So I'm quite impressed. I think BCCI has done a good job. So thank you everybody for being present here. As Dr. Mukherjee introduced the subject, that it's a user and producer interactive session, I would just like to touch on a few points. I have no presentation because a lot has been said. I think from the morning we have had several sessions on the gaps and the issues and the problems of infrastructure, finance, etc., etc. A lot of people have said a lot of things. All of them actually sum up the size of the problem as it is today. But I thought I would just bring to the table one or two small issues which I can leave it for your thinking. Firstly, a philosophical question is, why are we in this position today where we are saying that we are struggling with imports coming into the country and that we are not well placed to counter all the challenges that are there from the international world? Is it something to do with entrepreneurship? Or is the problem somewhere else? I think firstly the point that I would like to make, that India lacks no entrepreneurship. As we have seen in plenty, there are entrepreneurships galore, and I think Indians not only have done well in India but have done well more abroad. So it's a proof, and proof of the pudding, so to say. And we know that Indian entrepreneurs are very kind of proactive. But if you look at the analysis of the entrepreneurs, if you see a little bit of next level of detail, you'll see probably that the entrepreneurs who have got two kinds, which is the brick and mortar and the software world. You'll find probably the entrepreneurship of the Indian people in the software part is more. Even as you take a look at the Indian situation now with daily news about Snapdeals and Olas of the world, you'll find a lot of investments and a lot of things going in. Which means what does that indicate? So there is a growth rate which is quite different from the growth rate that is there in the brick and mortar industry, which is today's subject. And why is that? I think some of the answers, we saw that in the morning. But we need to ponder that, is there a difference in the ease of doing business on the software side versus the hardware side? And I think the answers are not very far to find, because it was summed up in various presentations in the morning. There are issues on the hardware side, like land acquisition. Somebody talked about power, somebody talked about raw materials. All of it sums up the problems which are there on the hardware side. So I think the problem that we should try to find an answer today as a group is to find out, how do we find resolution to these hardware issues? And if we were to find a resolution to these, then our GDP, which is now skewed between 56 and 26 between manufacturing and software or services, can actually be made equated, and we can make the Make in India a real success. So I think we need to find an answer to that. That's the first point that I wanted to make. The second part that I wanted to make is, India prides itself, and everybody says so. You look at any internet, open up any internet article, and you'll find India is one of the most best places in the world to make steel. Yes, it is. In fact, if you look at any journal, India prides itself saying it's probably the lowest cost manufacturer of steel. I myself and Dr. Mukherjee have been part of the organization which have repeatedly been scored as the lowest cost producer of steel. On the other hand, when it comes to the market, we lose that competitive edge. And then we are scared of people who are coming in from China and all the other parts of the world, because we say we are not competitive. So why is it? Where is it that is going wrong? Where is it that we are lowest cost on the manufacturing as the plant or as the product leaves the plant, and then as we get to the market, it suddenly becomes uncompetitive? I think therein is the summation of a lot of issues. And these issues can be summed up broadly in three areas. Firstly is infrastructure. So whether you're talking of incoming or outgoing infrastructure, everywhere we have a problem. And all these, any infrastructural problem actually translates itself into cost. So as we have made the steel, and it comes in as we say as assembled cost, and as it goes out, which is the reach to market cost, both these add up and make us uncompetitive. The second issue is around financial, which is the cost of capital, etc., that one talked about. And thirdly, as far as the issues are concerned, is in terms of the logistics that we have to reach to the market. And I think it has been repeated many a times that our truck fares and our railway fares, all of them are far too expensive. We have complicated taxes, a tax regime which the government is trying to break down with this GST, which keeps on adding cost to the final producer. So when this final lowest cost producer reaches the customer, it is not competitive, and people from around the world do get a chink in the armor in trying to find and sell its product. So we need to find as a group an answer to this problem. I think that is one of the issues that I would like to make. The third and the last point that I would like to make is around the marketplace. India is a large market. Everybody talks about this number, that we are 60 kilos and 57 kilos per person. In a developed world, we are something like 600. The world average is 180 to 200. So you do a simple multiplication of 200 into 1.5 billion people, you'll find that we should be making 300 million tons of steel, etc., etc. But where does the calculation go wrong? The calculation goes wrong in, again, one of the presentations which was made in the morning. It says our rural population, which is about 70%, the consumption is less than 10 kilos. So how do you drive consumption in the rural industry and in the rural part of India? And that's where I think the third answer to our problem lies, because the answer to Indian steel industry is not protection. The answer to steel industries today is to achieve economies of scale. And when you achieve economies of scale at the industry stage, you need to be beyond a certain tonnage. And in my mind, the figure is that any steel mill which is less than 5 to 7 million or 10 million ton is not efficient. It cannot be efficient in terms of its pricing. So therefore, in terms of its costing and cost structure, it may sound a little quaint to the people who come from smaller steel plants, but that's what it is. If you look at the Chinese experience, it's the same. They shut down all the older and polluting steel industries. They did a whole restructuring around that. So the point which I am trying to say is that if we were to look at the market and try to get this value of the steel to our consumers in the rural sector, and that's where which will push up consumption, and that's where this 60 kilos that we are talking about would actually be really driving it up to 100 or 120 kilos. Not so much on urban consumption or urban retail consumption. Yes, projects like infrastructure, roads, buildings, rails, etc. will drive up. But I think when you are talking numbers and when you are talking of these kilos per head, then one has to look at driving up rural consumption. And what would drive rural consumption? That's the answer that the Indian industry needs to find out. Rural consumption cannot be driven at the cost of steel that is available in the market today. The steel companies can be hunky-dory saying that yes, we have made profit when the prices are $400 and $500, $800 as far as cold rolled steel is concerned. But will your consumer in the marketplace, in the rural market, buy your product at that price? The answer is no. So our ability to find a market and a sustained marketplace in our rural sector which would drive consumption and would drive the steel industry is the third issue that I want to put on the table. Thank you. With that, I rest my case.
I think the main point you told is that protection is not the answer, but ways to find how Indian steel industry can become more competitive and what the government and the industries can do to make this thing more competitive and approach all sorts of market in the cities or in the rural area. So that's the main point you mentioned, and very important points. After that, I'll request Somnath Guha. He is also from the steel industry. He has spent 30 years in steel, and many of those years were in Jamshedpur, where he was the chief operating officer of Usha Martin Steel.
Good afternoon. I think when we were given this topic of user-producer interactive session, one of the points crossed my mind is it that we are going to discuss more about between user and producer issues, or is it, aren't we in the same boat, both the user and producer in steel sector? And are we not affected or supported by the same industrial ecosystem? I think whatever discussion is coming out since morning, most of the focus is on that. We have this number firmly in our mind of 300 million, which I think is getting repeated in most of our deliberations. We also firmly know that we are at 60, and the target multiplication numbers, etc., has got a lot of calculations already been explained. But issue does come up is, under those circumstances, in one hand, other things which are getting deliberated upon is our I'll say manufacturing drive, Make in India drive, which is basically trying to have a manufacturing-led transformation. Now this part definitely will come a bit from metals, because metal has a strong bearing in this manufacturing and the entire chain of manufacturing. Now on the other hand, if you see what are the present issues, we are going through a, I'll say, recalibration in the mining sector. We are also, what we heard, that one of the second largest NPA is from the metal industry. We also know that we are one of the lowest cost producer of steel till it reaches the consumer, where the costs are different. And we also are aware that our image in the marketplace, or when we go outside the country, is more based on cheap steel, lower cost of steel manufacturing rather than anything else. So I think, like China, we are also getting, to some extent, getting branded with the cheap steel producing country, or looking at steel, commodity steel, which are on the lower side than any other value added steel, or I'll say value proposing steel. Now under those two contexts, what I thought is, let us deliberate about the structure which exists in the steel chain, or any metal chain, for instance. That's, we are consisting of large enterprises, we consist of medium and small enterprises, and it is in combination when you go through the entire chain, which moves the steel up to the consumer. While large enterprises have certain movements, they are much more serious, they are having the capability, but the small and medium enterprises has limitations. And whether we like it or not, today 45% of the entire manufacturing comes from SMEs. While there are a lot of things to be done by LMEs, large enterprises as well, but SMEs has a strong contribution, and this manufacturing driven transformation cannot happen unless the SMEs are also working in tune in a big way, I'll say, from a transformational thinking manner. Now if we say, okay, can we draw some analogy? One of the analogies I thought of sharing or understanding is when we see the German SMEs. The German SMEs, what is common between us and the German SMEs, who are very popular? They are also mostly private owned. There are probably 4 million SMEs there, and whereas we have 48 million, if you go by the registered number, they have certain things different than us. When we see the output side, when we start evaluating the output side, like most of them, if we see, they have some leadership in the world. I think, be it in engineering, be it in electrics, be it in design, they have an excellence. They are known throughout the world for excellence. That is one stark difference we see. I think they have more than half of the SMEs, what we have been told or we have seen through records, that have patents in their name, and global patents. Whereas in India, probably not even 10% have R&D setups. Patents are quite a distance. We also know that their output is about something like $250 billion, whereas the output from the 45% here is a meager 120 billion. So if you see, the output differences are quite large, and when it comes to the conceptual part of it. Probably they believe in doing few things, but they want to get into the depth and the mastery of it. And they want to pursue the excellence in that few things they do. So that is a stark difference. And whereas here, when we think about SMEs, we think about lower rank products. We think about products which are definitely not the most trusted ones. This is a stark difference we find. And when we place ourselves in front of the consumer, so how does the consumer sees us? Now the consumer in the developing world and the developed world definitely has a different behavior. When we see the developed world, we do see factors like patriotism, factors like belongingness, pride, emotional connect with the product, and they are willing to pay a price which is premium for their own product made in their country. But in a developing world, and same thing happens in India as well, that is not really true. Our preference goes to the international product, mostly product from the developed world. And here the perception, that means Indians' perception about products made in India also needs to go for a big change. And that is where I think we have to play a role between the user and the producer together. That it is a big market. The consuming points, as Partho said, is right. The villages has to be looked in. But overall the perception of our product within our country, with our people, also has to change. Leave aside our product, the perception when it goes outside India. The outside India, there are much bigger tasks, and we all know what are the things to be done. There are further complications which comes in today. A lot of issues comes up which are related to pollution, which are related to child labor, which are related to environment. So those things gets coupled up and makes things more complex, but definitely which can be addressed. So with this, what thought of leaving behind as a part is that both user, producer, we are in the same engineering or I'll say industrial ecosystem, has similar worries. Unless we work together closely and reposition ourselves with respect to cost, with respect to our brand, with respect to our research and development, which is definitely much below what most of the countries are. Our research and R&D expenses are about 0.8% of GDP, which is far below. And in that, if you see, the investment from the public sector companies or government is more than 60%, and when it comes to the private, it is definitely far from what it should be. So with all these there are a lot of room to work upon, while the infrastructure, the enabling factors has to come from the government and from the other side. But I think we have also a lot of work to do within ourselves to remain a preferred choice. Thank you.
Thank you, Somnath. I think you brought out some major points. First is that we need to change the perception about ourselves. And second point, although you did not say clearly, the steel does not have any nationality. That is, made in Japan or made in Germany, made in India does not make a difference. It depends on what equipment you have used and etc. So we need not be too worried because we are competing with some other countries. I think that point you made very well, but overall I feel that there has to be a manufacturing-led transformation, and for doing that thing we need to do a lot of work in different areas. I agree with you. I think our next speaker, he did not let me introduce him.
Stretch my leg.
Advance notice. Abraham Stefanos actually spent a lot of time in this ordinary material like aluminium. But then better sense prevailed and he came to steel. And he was with Tata Ryerson for some time. Now he is in charge of the new name of the company, Tata Steel Processing and Distribution Company Limited. Abraham.
Dr. Mukherjee, Partho, other colleagues on the dais, and friends, good afternoon. And and thank you for staying back in large numbers. So when I looked at the title of this session, Users Producers Interactive Session, and I noticed where I was seated. Seated between Dr. Mukherjee and Partho Sengupta, two people I have tremendous respect for, because Dr. Mukherjee was one of the people who conceptualized Tata Ryerson as a company, so the first steel service center company in India, and he also was our director for several years, and he guided us, gave us several new ideas, and also he's the person who modernized Tata Steel to the extent that I have been able to observe after I joined the Tatas. He was our supplier or producer for the service center, and on my right hand side was Partho Sengupta, who was my customer. He was the person who modelized the supply chain. So I was very intimately connected with their roles, and I was quite pleased to find myself sitting between them in this session. So when I thought about what we should be discussing, and in the morning we discussed issues that concern the steel industry as such, the specific issues related to, you can say, industry constraints that lead to very high price, the macroeconomic situation, and so I thought that I would just step out of the value chain, steel value chain for a moment, and try to look at it from a third party perspective. From purely a steel service center point of view, what we observed. The first thing is the marketplace has changed, and it has changed tremendously. I am sure we'll all agree that 20 years back, one wouldn't have to wait for the government to impose anti-dumping duty or some safeguard duty or anything like that. If any steel was getting imported into India beyond, which is affecting domestic immediately, protection will be given. It was a market which was dominated by the interests of the producers. But today, it is quite different. This is a market where India is a supplier to the rest of the world. Our manufacturing industry makes in India for the world. If you look at Hyundai, they make in India, and some models are only made in India and exported. If you look at Ford, so it's make in India for the rest of the world. So the pressures on the user industry side are distinctly different today than in the past, where the user industries were mainly making for India. So we could be a closed system with a lot of protection. But those dynamics don't work anymore. And as a service center, we've always been conflicted about this, because even when